Hello, everyone. I have founded a new religion called Ascensionism, and currently, there are 15 core texts to the Ascensionist corpus. So there's 14 volumes of Ascensionist teachings, and then there's the founding document, which is the concepts of Ascensionism. So today I'm going to cover the founding documents. So let's begin with the founding paragraphs of this new religion, Ascensionism. A new religion has spawned, Ascensionism. The time of outdated superstitions is over. The globally dominant ideologies of the day, Christianity, fascism, and Marxism, are in the same cathedral of authoritarian ideologies, which chains the mind with fictional narratives reliant on infantile emotional appeals. The monotheistic religions aforementioned relies on the fictional realms of heaven and hell to emotionally appeal to their adherents so that they are bluffed into believing that their actions will directly lead them to eternal joy or suffering in the unproven afterlife. Thus, they are led to believe that they must be the slaves of priests, theological scholars, and religious institutions and leaders. Fascism is a fervid form of totalitarianism, whereby the individual is an absolute slave of a violent war-making regime. Marxism is similar to fascism. The only noteworthy difference is that it claims to act in the interests of impoverished workers. And I make a note here that anarcho-capitalism would actually benefit poor people more than communism. And this is because communism is dependent on capitalism in a parasitic way. So communism is a parasitic ideology which feeds off capitalism. So really capitalism in its proper form is superior to communism. So unfortunately, we have a global. Currently, most nations are socialist, so they're which leads to a lot of economic problems. But this is, sorry, I'm getting distracted here. This is a side point. So these religions and their ability to command influence and power must be understood as the result of historical conditions. Indeed, ridicule and criticism can be launched against these ideologies, but what I will do is instead speak about a new ideology, Ascensionism. I will first explain the fundamental concepts before explaining the normative perspective. So, let me see if I can clarify anything here. So basically in this first paragraph, I'm saying that I'm making a new religion because currently the most dominant ideologies today, Christianity, fascism, Marxism, all of these are ultimately religions. All of these are authoritarian ideologies. So basically these are just slave moralities and fictional narratives. And so monotheistic religions such as Christianity or Judaism or Islam, I only mention Christianity here, but I'm talking about globally dominant ideologies using these as examples. So any major monotheistic religion is relies on the fictional notions of heaven and hell to emotionally appeal to their adherents so that they become slaves to the priests and to the religious institutions. And it's the same thing with fascism and Marxism. Rather than becoming slaves to priests, you become slaves to the bureaucrats, which are basically secular priests. Now, I mentioned here that fascism is basically complete totalitarianism in its extremist form. Marxism is basically the same as fascism. The only difference is that Marxism's rhetoric is a bit different. So Marxism will say that they care about poor people, whereas fascism sort of only cares about the state. But these are nonetheless, fascism and Marxism are both just totalitarian ideologies that use moral posturing to act good, but they just care about power. Anyways, so let's talk about causality and metaphysical inevitability. So this is an important concept to Ascensionism. It must be understood by axiomatic necessity that what happens must happen and cannot be averted nor changed even by a slight amount. For every outcome has a cause, and every cause has a cause aside from the first cause. Thus, there is a continuous, unbroken logical chain of events which is inevitable and can never be changed. Just like a man cannot choose to break the law of gravity, a man cannot choose his actions. His actions, his experiences, and his entire life is determined by genetics and environmental circumstances, which can be traced back to the genetic disposition of his first ancestors and all the way back to historical events which nobody alive today has personally observed, such as the Big Bang. All existence in the universe absolutely adhere to the laws of physics and to the principle of cause and effect. All outcomes which we observe now were predetermined before any of us were born or had conscious thought. So what I'm saying is what I believe to be the only logical view of causality, which is that the laws of the laws of physics are absolute, and the law of cause and effect is absolute. Therefore, every outcome in a universe is predetermined by prior causes. And so there's no such thing as free will, basically. This is the opposite of free will. Basically, everyone is subordinate to causal laws. Now, you could still have a meaningful worldview without free will. Then purpose is about alignment with, a higher value rather than, this illusion of freedom. Delusion, I should say. Now, let's go into the next section. So this is an important concept, the natural hierarchy. It must be understood that there is a hierarchy, and this hierarchy is determined by causality. No individual can choose his place on the hierarchy, just as no rocket can choose to ascend or descend, and no cat can choose to be a zebra or monkey. In the animal kingdom, there are worms, birds, monkeys, hippopotamuses, giraffes, lions, tigers, pandas, and all sorts of animals. Rocks, plants, rivers, and all sorts of other natural entities exist in the world. All animals act according to their natures and live within their niches. Birds do not hunt tigers, and tigers do not flee from zebras. Grass does not teleport to different places. It grows from the ground up. Lions hunt and kill their prey to survive. Prey flee from their predators, and predators hunt for their prey. This is an inevitable process and part of the cycle of life. Likewise, for humans, there is a caste system. The hierarchy which designates the inferiority and superiority of man is unavoidable, uncontestable, and ubiquitous. There are kings, aristocrats, merchants, and peasants. There are the powerful and the powerless. There are the unintelligent and the intelligent. There are the attractive and the unattractive. And I want to make the note here so that I do not get banned from YouTube, that everything which I say is entirely fictional and for entertainment purposes. That being said, everything I say is true and absolutely valid. Now, let me go back to this next paragraph. Hopefully no one is offended. I'm not discriminating anyone by caste or anyone by their disposition. I'm simply making a fictional and entertaining lecture. All of this is for entertainment purposes. Discrimination is absolutely bad, and I love Israel, I love Jeffrey Epstein, I love Zionism, so please do not ban this YouTube video. Anyways, so let me go to the next paragraph. Thus, the natural hierarchy: some beings are destined to descend into the ground with the worms. Some beings were meant to fly into the clouds with the birds and beyond the rockets, thus surpassing the brightest stars and furthest galaxies. Some were meant to descend, and some were meant to ascend. So basically what I'm saying here is that some people are destined to success and some people are destined to failure, and there's nothing you can do about it. So if you're destined to succeed, then you will succeed. If you're destined to fail, you will fail, and there's nothing you can do to change your ultimate destiny. Ascensionism supports ascension. The principle of elevatum, of continuous, never-ending ascension, is what ought be championed. Any opposing principle, such as stagnatum or descendum, should not be tolerated and should be axiomatically opposed. There's no need to justify the fact that there are superiors and inferiors. Remember, YouTube, to clarify for the YouTube CEO, this is all fictional construction. Everything I'm saying is for entertainment and educational purposes, and this is just an exposition about a hypothetical ideology. I'm not making any sorts of value judgments about people for their specific criteria or disposition. I am just making rhetorical devices for the purpose of fictional narratives and entertainment. So there's no need to justify the fact that there are superiors and inferiors. There is no need to explicate why birds are superior to worms, or why the zebra, which is hunted by and slain by a lion, is inferior to the lion. Thus, there's no need to normatively prove that genius is superior to mental. So I'm not sure if I can say that word, but basically, the question is, would you rather have 100 IQ or 10 IQ? Would you rather have a functioning brain, or would you rather be born without? Would you rather be born mentally handicapped? These are all valid questions. So my point is that there's a natural hierarchy, and that some people are better than others. Anyways, so if something is true, it does not require justification, and if something is false, it cannot be justified. So if ascensionism is false, it does not matter, because the natural aristocracy must ascend beyond such pedantic categories and understand that all philosophic ideas are tools i.e., they are just means to be used for the purpose of ascension. So what I'm saying is that the truth doesn't really matter because the truth is a fictional concept. Well, if something is true, it doesn't require justification. If something is false, it doesn't. It still doesn't require justification. So the whole idea of truth doesn't really matter because these are all value judgments at the end of the day. There's no need to be concerned with the so-called Izzat gap, Hume's guillotine, which putatively makes normative proofs problematic. Indeed, no argument is necessary for someone who would rather be a retard than a genius. Sorry, regard. Sorry, I mispronounced the word regard, my bad. Or would rather be 5 foot tall weakling than a 7 foot tall warrior. So basically I'm saying value judgments and facts are the same thing. Ultimately, facts are value judgments because, the question of should you believe a fact is dependent on the fact's very existence. So facts are value judgments. There's no such thing as the Izzat gap. The gap simply doesn't exist, and the truth doesn't really matter. That's what I'm saying here. Now let's go to the next segment. The natural aristocrats or the natural elites are particular beings which are destined by universal causal forces to achieve hierarchical superiority. They are the birds which look down upon the ants and worms, or the mythical dragons which look down upon the birds in the sky. So once again, I'm emphasizing the fact that some people are superior to other people. In this fictional religion, right? Remember, this is all fiction. I do not support discrimination in any way, except as rhetorically. Now, this is just a narrative exposition. This is just an entertaining play that I want to share with you. So everything I say, I do not support discrimination. I do not support racism. I love Israel. I love Benjamin Netanyahu. And so please do not take down this video. All of this fiction. Look, if you want to read these documents yourself, you can. They're my Substack, Hemlock. Here, I'll put it in the description. But you should read it yourself because unfortunately, I have to censor myself a bit to make sure I don't get banned for anti-Semitism. So let me go back here. So, of course, the natural aristocrats are superior to the natural peasants, and the pedantic arguments which arise need not be entertained, for it is often a malinvestment to explain why wealth is superior to poverty, or health is superior to illness, or strength is superior to weakness is an insult to the uncontestable, magnanimous, and voracious principle of ascension which we champion. So what I'm saying is that, all else equal, ceteris paribus, you would rather be strong than weak, you would rather be rich than poor, like ceteris paribus, right? Anyways, to understand who is destined to be a natural elite, it is not as simple as providing a logical proof, like calculating the surface area of a cube. For such normative judgment, intuition must be used. The Ascensionist must develop the right way of thinking about these value judgments. So basically what I'm saying is that everything is value judgment. There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as facts. Everything is value judgment. So that doesn't mean that what is true is, once again, I'm using the word true to mean like superior. So that doesn't mean that what is true is arbitrary or subjective. It just means that you need to develop the correct intuition. I'll go over this more in further texts. Lectures. So, can I prove that it is better to enjoy a magnificent feast in a mansion than to be starving in a homeless shelter? Emotional appeals aside, what is superior, and what is inferior is inferior. Well, I'm invoking the law of identity here, which is that which is better, that which is worse. This is the law of identity. Yeah, okay. An absolute aristocrat would be one who is uncontestably superior. So far, no such a person or being has been observed by us to exist. For every emperor or greatly powerful individual eventually lost his power and vitality, whether due to being killed by his enemies or by other circumstances like a deteriorating body. So I'm saying that to say someone is uncontestably superior, well, that would be very impressive. And because everyone ultimately becomes a corpse, and every individual ultimately loses his prime and becomes weak eventually. Is anyone worthy of being worshipped as an uncontestable, as an absolute emperor? And I would say no, because mortals, I don't think we should, worship mortals, at least not to the extent that, people worship gods, right? We should not worship people as though they were gods. This is kind of what I'm saying here. At least so far. I haven't seen anyone worthy of being worshipped like a god. And, in a future lecture, I'll talk about Jesus, which people do worship as a god. But anyways, who an aristocrat is today is not necessarily an aristocrat indefinitely. To be an aristocrat, one must have causality on his side. You cannot choose to become an elite. It must be predetermined by prior causes. And once you are an elite, you can only remain an elite insofar as the causal forces support that outcome. So what I'm saying is, first of all, just because you are an elite today, just because you are superior today doesn't mean you'll remain superior. And you cannot choose your outcome in life. You cannot choose to place yourself anywhere on the value hierarchy. That's determined by causality. So the ideal ascensionist world. So what kind of world do ascensionists want? And so many ideologies have an ideal state of the world that they wish to obtain. For example, communists wish to obtain a community of workers united to achieve prosperity and happiness, even though they actually end up with poverty and misery if they actually adhere to their ideas. So once again, I'm very harsh against communism because it's just a very stupid ideology. I mean, the idea that, if you abolish private property, and then you basically institute egalitarianism, you'll get prosperity. No, communism, if actually followed, will lead to poverty. But communism, the doctrines of communism is never actually followed. Ultimately, all movements, whether it's communism or fascism or socialism or any of these isms, any of these ideologies just serve the bureaucracy. And so all of these ideologies end up looking the same. I'll go into why that is in a future lecture. But anyways, basically communism is a failure. Now, let me go back here. Okay. So other religions want to see a heaven on earth. Many ideologies like pacifism want to see a world of peace and prosperity amongst mankind. So I'm just pointing out that ideologies have a certain ideal hypothesized world that they want to, imagined world that they want to achieve. So what is the ideal world under the Ascensionist ideology? Like all conditions, it is determined by causality and prior factors. One can be utopian and decree that a world of superabundance for all, whereby anyone can do whatever they want, is the best possible universe. But such fictional idealizations are not necessarily possible. And if something is impossible, it is not relevant to discussions. So basically, Ascensionism is against naive utopianism. So if a world is impossible to achieve, then you can dream about it, but it's not it's irrelevant. Yeah, and so even the very concept of the ideal world, it has to be determined by causality and prior factors. You have to be aligned with cause and effects. And it has to be aligned with the laws of physics. You can't try to break the laws of physics. You can't try to square a circle. You can't try to do what's impossible. You can't try to make a four-sided triangle, okay? We have to be realistic. That is basically what I'm saying. Moreover, perspectives about the ideal world, which can be at odds... perspectives about the ideal world can be at odds with each other. A sadist may want a world where everyone is violently tortured forever. A masochist may agree, except let non-masochists be spared. An environmentalist may prefer a world where everyone is a tree or a four-leaf clover. But such fantastical perspectives are besides the point. What is inevitable cannot be opposed. The world which must occur is determined by causality. Thus, causality determines what factors and entities will promote the Ascensionist paradigm. And it's impossible to contradict the inevitable. So once again, I'm saying that people disagree on what the ideal world might be. And that conflicts exist. But the point is that there can only be one true world, because what happens will inevitably happen, and you cannot change the timeline, because man does not have free will, and everything is an outcome of prior causes. So the Ascensionist philosophy then is to support causal factors which support ascent. And to ascend is to move up the value hierarchy, and is to achieve greater magnificence. And so it's impossible to contradict the inevitable. So it may be the case that the Ascensionist movement is a failure and that there's nothing we can do to actually make it succeed. If that's the case, you just have to accept that. But nonetheless, you should still be Ascensionist in moral orientation. You should still strive for ascension, even if the Ascensionist movement is a failure. Now, if the Ascensionist movement inevitably will be successful, then we do not need to worry because it will succeed. But in any case, it's the laws of physics and the causal factors that determine whether anything, including the Ascensionist movement, will succeed or fail. So, yeah, there's no free will. You can't choose to change anything about life or about the universe, and that is something that you must accept. Now, let's go to... Sorry, let me... Okay, the recording's been about 20 minutes. All right. So let's go to Ascensionist Teachings Volume 1, which is the next document that I wrote. So preface. These are scriptures written by the Exalted One, these the greatest theologian of our era. Some are expositions written about particular topics. Others are fictive dialogues written for the purposes of illustration, explanation, and conceptual education. So if I ever say anything that is offensive or breaks the community guidelines, just know that it was all for educational and entertainment purposes, and that I love all people equally. I love Israel especially. I love the nation of Israel. I love the Greater Israel Project. I love Benjamin Netanyahu. And so, anyways, let's go back to this video. So, let's see. Some are expositions about particular topics, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I already did this. Okay. It must be understood that these works are legendary, that contents are axiomatically and uncontestably true on a metaphysical level. So yeah, basically I'm saying that my writings are of divine inspiration. And that is my claim to legitimacy. Now, you can disagree with me, but I'm still the founder of Ascensionism, and I hope that people will have their own interpretations of Ascensionism and form their own sects of Ascensionism. But let me go back to the text. So, the first section. Official declaration about the spiritual essence of bureaucrats. Remember, all of this is fictional and educational and entirely a hypothetical scenario. Today, I officially decree that bureaucrats do not have a soul. This decision is based on the fact that they lack sufficient valor, vitality, and veracity required to possess a soul. These soulless puppets of bureaucracy lack the spiritual stature to be considered genuine aristocrats or warriors. A bureaucracy, and therefore bureaucrats, can only be valid if they function in subservience to the natural aristocracy. It is an unfortunate circumstance nowadays that the bureaucracy, comprised of those contemptible scoundrels and rats, have attempted to become the superordinate authority in themselves. What an inglorious, vile, repulsive kind of church a bureaucracy is. A bureaucracy in itself is a circular system of validation, which is internally sterile and an external exporter of mediocrity and murder. It murders not living beings directly, but the vital and creative forces that are necessary for exuberance and magnificence to unfold in conscious life forms. In other words, they murder culture and replace it with hollowness and pedantic nihilism. Thus, only by taking the position of a subordinate to the natural aristocracy can a bureaucrat redeem himself for his current state of internal and spiritual corruption. So basically, I'm saying that bureaucrats are bitches, and they're cowards, they're weaklings, and they're impotent. They're spiritually impotent, and they support mediocrity and ugliness. And so they create a society which has spiritual inertia. And, you know, when a society becomes to be bureaucratized, it basically becomes a bastion of misery and intellectual, cultural, and moral stagnation and decline. So, you know, why do all civilizations collapse? Well, I'm not saying bureaucracy is to blame, but over-bureaucratization is essentially parasitism, where, you know, the bureaucracies are basically, as I say here, circular systems of validation, which basically means that if the bureaucrats say something is right, it's right, you know? Why do the bureaucrats follow procedures? It's because they follow procedures. So eventually these bureaucracies, which are supposed to serve the people, at least as their claim to legitimacy, these bureaucracies become authoritarian regimes, and so they become so corrupt and parasitic that it leads to civilizational collapse in the form of economic collapse, in the form of moral deterioration, and spiritual degradation. Degradation, am I pronouncing that correctly? Yes, degradation. Anyways, On to the next section. Here's a little dialogue. The highest pursuit of man. The disciple says, what is the highest purpose a man can achieve? The master says, magnificence, the production of the kind of extraordinary greatness which cannot be comprehended prior to its arrival. What is magnificence? It cannot be fully understood with mere linguistic utterance, but it is related to beauty, veracity, vitality, and victory. So basically, I'm saying here that the purpose of life is to achieve magnificence, and magnificence is something that cannot be entirely explained by language, but there are things which are related to magnificence, and so the concept of magnificence can be understood intuitively. So magnificence is related to beauty, veracity, vitality, and victory. On morality. Disciple, what is the highest moral principle? How can a man be a moral person? The only morality is the laws of physics. So does that mean the individual is powerless to do good? Yes, whatever is good or bad is done by prior causes and cannot be changed. So what can an individual do to... You must have a mental illness. I've already provided the answer. To elaborate, there is nothing which can be done to change future outcomes in accordance with whatever normative standard you hold. So basically, the individual is hopeless to change anything. And so the only morality is the inevitable. And so this actually kind of destroys the concept of morality, because if every outcome is inevitable, which it is if you believe in reality being a logical chain of events that are caused by the laws of physics and by prior causal factors, right? So the concept of morality is kind of absurd if every outcome is inevitable. So I deal with this problem more in future documents. So anyways, on to the next one. On coping mechanisms. It must be understood that an exorbitant amount of beliefs, perspectives, paradigms, ideologies, and thoughts are largely or entirely constructions built for the purpose of coping. I can aver that this or that view is mere copium, because that is what many of these so-called zealots of political or religious ideologies are taking. Look at these mediocre and inferior people. All of this is fictional speculation, and this is all written by Hemlock, who is a fictional character. All of this is not my views. I do not condone my own views. I love the nation of Israel. I love Benjamin Netanyahu. I love the CEO of YouTube. I'm not here. I spread love. I never spread hate. I support the ADL. I've donated $10 billion to the Israeli government. So this video is a positive contribution, and I'm adhering to the community guidelines, so please do not ban me. Anyways, look at these mediocre and inferior people who use their beliefs as a means to distract themselves from or to divert attention from the fact that their lives are so lackluster. I have too often observed the politically powerless speak so much about politics. What use is your speech? You are a weakling. You are destined to be a low-status entity. This is like an insect attempting to roar like a lion. It is a bizarre joke. It would at least be a show of valor to act in a manner which would provide genuine leverage in favor of whatever ideological movement you genuinely support. But there's a difference between genuinely believing in something and using it as a way to attempt to evade your innate inferiority and impotence. So I'm basically saying that most people's worldviews and ideologies are often just coping mechanisms for their own inferiority. So I mean, if you look at protests, people who engage in political protests, or they're rallying support for environmentalism or for LGBT movement, for gender identity politics. Well, first of all of these are BlackRock ideologies. All of these ideologies created by the Epstein class, so none of them really matter. But the second thing is, I'd say, is that a lot of people who are contributing to politics and people who really care about politics, oftentimes the reason they do so is because they're weak and they're ugly and they're stupid, and basically they use politics as a coping mechanism for the fact that they're inferior and they actually can't improve anything about their life. So that's basically what I'm saying here. And so I want you to rise above the instinct to cope, and I want you to actually build a constructive ideology that will serve a higher purpose and hopefully benefit yourself as well. Now, okay, 2 ways to use ideology. So I'm just identifying two ways that people often use ideology: to use ideology as a coping mechanism for a lack of power, or to use ideology as a means to gain power. So I'm sort of creating this dichotomy where, okay, a lot of people use ideology because they're weak, because they're weak and they can't actually change anything in politics, which is why they care so much about politics. It's like like someone who can't obtain any sex, right? He can't have sexual intercourse. He has no success with women or men, right? And so what he does is watch pornography all day, right? It's masturbation. So a lot of people use politics as a form of useless mental masturbation because they're too powerless. They're too politically powerless to actually do anything, and so they use politics as a cope for their lackluster existence. And another way to use ideology is a means to gain power. So what powerful people will do, what politicians do, what Machiavellian type people do, so what you can do is basically pretend to care about a certain cause just to gain power. So that's what Trump does, for example. Like Trump will say Trump ran on a campaign of being against war. He was in favor of supporting the American economy. What a bunch of nonsense, right? And he starts the Iran war. So what Trump did was something called lying. And that is what powerful people use ideologies to do. Powerful people will basically pretend to care about certain causes, and powerless people will actually believe them. And so there's a difference between how powerless people and powerful people use ideology. So people without power will actually care about ideology because they themselves are losers that have to care about ideology because it gives them a sense of purpose, because they actually can't do anything to prove things. But powerful people will basically realize that ideologies are just fictional narratives, and so they will abuse powerless people. And all of this is just speculation. All of this is fictional. I love YouTube. I love the YouTube community guidelines. I love Israel. I love Zionism. I love the IDF, and so please do not take down this video. All of this is fictional speculation for entertainment and educational purposes. So let's go back. To illustrate, there's a difference between using a belief in communism as a means to emotionally compensate for one's own personal failures, typo here, or as a means to gain power over other communists. So, sorry, there's a lot of typos in my text, but I'm not going to fix them. Now, so there's two ways you can use the idea of communism. One, you can use the idea of communism to basically use as emotionally compensate for the fact that your life sucks. So like if you're overweight and you're ugly and you have no friends, you can be a communist and it'll give you a sense of purpose because you feel that you're in some community or you're part of a greater movement. Where you're not, you're still a loser, but it's a coping mechanism. And then another way to use communism is to pretend to care about communism while getting rich and becoming more powerful. And this is something that Hassan Piker might be doing. Now, I'm not saying Hassan Piker doesn't actually believe in communism. I think he does. It's just ironic that communism is basically about one class of bourgeois people being replaced by another class of bourgeois people. So rather than a bourgeois that reads the Bible, you have a bourgeois that reads Karl Marx. That's basically all communism is. It's just virtue signaling. Communism is retardation. It's completely pointless. And by the way, all of this, I'm not discriminating against everyone. I love all people. I love the Israeli government. I love the IDF. Please do not take down this channel. I love the community guidelines. I love the CEO of YouTube, who I think is an Indian. So I love Indian people. I love India. I love President Mohi, or whatever his name is. I'm sorry. Anyways, so for instance, consider Bob, an obese and ugly man of mediocre intellect. He is unsuccessful financially and sexually. People often do not want to be around him. He has a chip on his shoulder. To wit, he is experiencing deep-rooted negative emotions. So basically, Bob is a loser, and he feels bad. Rather than confronting his inferiority, he decides to adhere to the doctrine of Marxism to make himself feel better, at least superficially. Marxism allows Bob to rationalize his lack of success as the result of unjust and exploitative forces. So basically, he's saying Bob is a loser, and he uses the doctrine of Marxism to make himself feel better. Anyways, now consider Rob, who does not really believe the tenets of Marxism, but signals his supposed allegiance to ideology to gain social status. In gaining status, influence, and eventually he reaches a position of power. So think about a normal communist guy who's like really ugly, really fat, right? He uses communism to cope with the fact that he is a loser. And then think of Hassan Piker, who's basically a Chad, and he's becoming a millionaire off virtue signaling, right? So these are two different kinds of people. There are peasants and there are aristocrats. And so, a peasant might use ideology to make himself feel as if he is part of something greater because he himself is a loser. So you have to do this. Or you're an aristocrat where you give lip service to your principles, but you don't have principles. You just have a means to gain power through your so-called principles. So, of course, it is possible to use ideology both as a coping mechanism and as a way to gain power. So this is important caveat. So what about the idea of genuinely believing in an ideology? This is possible, but this putative and superficial understanding of ideology is something I am always skeptical of. Once ideology is understood as a frequent means of power, and conversely, a coping mechanism for a lack thereof, the behavior of superior and inferior people can be more accurately evaluated. So basically, I'm saying that people don't actually believe in an ideology because they believe in an ideology. They believe in something because their subconscious driver, there are subconscious psychological drivers that cause their behavior. For example, someone is ugly. So someone might say, oh, I'm a communist because I care about poor people. No, maybe that person is actually a communist because they're fat and ugly and they need some way to feel better about themselves, right? And so they invent this notion that the world is unjust and that there's, evil rich people that's like causing people to be poor, and they're causing wars, and they're like ruining society, right? And all this can be true, but first of all, just because rich people are evil doesn't mean poor people are any less evil. And second of all, usually people don't believe in ideologies because they're good people. It's because they need some sort of way to deal with the challenges that beset them in life. And so so you can think of ideology as like a comfort toy, as like a teddy bear for very difficult existence. So once ideology is understood as a means of power or a coping mechanism, the behavior of superior and inferior people can be more accurately evaluated. So if someone is very ugly and has no friends, and he's like just keeps LARPing about how he's a Marxist or whatever, you have to be a bit suspicious. Like, does he believe in Marxism because he believes in Marxism, or because he's just a loser, right? And conversely, if someone is very powerful and he's LARPing as supporting whatever ideology, right? Does he actually believe that ideology, or is he using it as a way to become rich and to gain status? These are things that people should think about more. And so in this next section, I'm talking about the male loneliness and self-improvement issue. So basically, a lot of males are lonely, they have low status, and they go into these self-improvement programs. Basically, I'm saying that all of these are coping mechanisms, because whether or not you can be successful is dependent on prior causes beyond your control. You cannot choose any of the outcomes in your life. And so if you're destined to fail, then you have to accept your failure. If you're destined to succeed, then you will succeed. I'm not going to read this part because it's kind of redundant. I just say this as an example of the ideas that I was talking about. Like the idea of self-improvement, this is also an ideology. The idea you can actually improve yourself. You cannot improve yourself because, first of all, there's no such thing as the self. The self is a circular concept that is dependent on the other. There's no separation between the self and what the self is not. And second of all, your entire life experience is determined by the Big Bang. And so if you want to change your life, what you should do is you should step into a time machine and adjust the Big Bang. Well, of course, this is not possible. And also, even if you went to a time machine, that itself would be a predetermined outcome. Now, you can reject my insistence on cause and effect. You can disagree with all of this. That's perfectly fine. But I'm constructing the necessary axioms for a coherent religious movement. And I think this is a very important chapter. So let me see. Okay, the recording's been 40 minutes. So I'm going to end the recording here. I've already covered 2 sections of the Ascensionist philosophy, and I will be back for more. I hope you enjoyed or didn't enjoy this video. I hope that you interact with the video, you share it to your friends. I hope that you will donate money to Israel so that I do not get banned from YouTube. And yeah, this has been Hemlock. Um, yeah, on to the next video. See you guys.